there, today is Monday, not Sunday, but you still know what that means. It's time for the brief. Obviously, our headliner is connected to the New Year's celebration, so that's what we're going to discuss as our first topic. Then we're gonna move on to all of the predictions that Ukrainian officials have made for the new year that they call victorious. Then talk about why the international community has labeled 2023 the year of Russian defeat and what evidence they have for that. And of course, we're going to address how the New Year's started for Russians. With that, hi, my name is Yulia and you're watching the brief New Year's edition, where we discuss everything important that happened leading up to and in the new year pertaining to and coming out of Ukraine so far in under 20 minutes. Let's go. Let's start with our headliner, and that is what January 1st, 2023 looked like for Ukraine. Kyiv residents woke up on morning of December 31st to some gifts from the sky in a form of heavy Russian shelling. Here's what President Zelenskyy had to say about this. Several waves of missile strikes on New Year's Eve. It was done by non-humans, and non-humans are losing. They made such strikes on Easter, on Christmas, on New Year. They call themselves Christians. They're very proud of their orthodoxy. But they are for the devil. They are for him and with him. Your leader is hiding behind you. He's burning your country and your future. No one will forgive you for terror. No one in the world will forgive you. Ukraine will never forgive. And while this was Zelenskyy's first speech of the day, it wasn't his main one. And I'm sure most of you have seen his New Year's address to the nation. But if you haven't, I'll leave the link to his full speech in the description of the video below. And in the meanwhile, I offer you to watch some of my favorite moments from that speech.
Знаємо достеменно, що принесе нам новий 23-й рік, але готові до всього. Нові здобутки – ми будемо щасливі. Нові удари – ми будемо непохитні. Продовження боротьби – будемо битись. А коли переможемо, будемо обійматись. Дорогі українці, залишається кілька хвилин до Нового року. Я хочу всім нам зараз побажати одного – перемоги. І це головне – одне побажання для всіх українців. Втрат для України, для всієї Європи, для усього світу. Але це невірно. Ми не маємо так говорити. Ми нічого не втратили. У нас забрали. Україна не втратила синів і доньок. Їх забрали вбивці. Українці не втратили домівки. Їх знищили терористи. Ми не втратили свої землі. На них зайшли загарбники. Світ не втратив мир. Росія його зруйнувала.
And Zelenskyy wasn't the only one to deliver a powerful arsenal of words this year. Defense Minister of Ukraine Alexei Reznikov followed suit and released a letter he wrote to Santa Claus on behalf of Ukrainian children.
Dear Santa, I'm sure that when you created this holiday, you imagined it in a completely different way. Air raid sirens, missiles destroying homes, blackouts and bomb shelters, worrying for a father or a mother on the front lines. I thank you for those various numerous gifts which have been receiving from you during this difficult year. They were very relevant and timely. I hope you don't mind that we generously shared some of your gifts with our deranged northern neighbor, who behaved very badly this year. I hope that we will receive many more important presents from you again. I won't even write out our wish list. You know very well what we need the most. I am not asking you for myself, but for the sake of our Ukrainian children, so that next year they can celebrate Christmas and New Year the way you intended them to be.
These were so powerful that I can't even say with certainty which one was my favorite. So I'd like to know which one was yours. And more importantly, what are your favorite quotes from these speeches? Did you find any of them inspirational? I'd like to take this moment to remind you that if you've enjoyed this video so far, don't forget to give it a like, leave a comment, subscribe to my channel, and turn on all of your notifications. Thank you. Then the clock struck midnight and Kyiv residents cheered for the armed forces of Ukraine from their windows. Take a look. Valery Zelenskyy then summed up the results of 2022 for the armed forces of Ukraine and therefore for our whole nation. Since February 24th, Ukrainian defenders have liberated up to 40% of all occupied territories. Ukrainian sappers have cleared 1,346.22 hectares of territory of mines over the year, which is an insane statistic. More than 100,000 enemy personnel were killed. And that number was proudly displayed on one of Kyiv's main buildings. No big deal. Then head of the main intelligence directorate of Ukraine, Kirill Budanov, shared his predictions for Ukraine for 2023. Russia has enough missiles for 2 massive strikes on Ukraine. They're reducing the number to keep imitating the intensity of these missile attacks. Russia needs to work for 1.5 to 2 months for 1 missile attack. By March, Russia will have a critical situation with weapons. Belarusian production is not able to provide Russia with weapons. Russian industry is not comparable to the industry of the Soviet Union. There is no production of strategic aircraft. These are all old aircraft. Because Soviet Union's might, glory, and strength actually depended on all of its satellites, not on Russia. No matter how much Russia wants you to think that it did. Russians faced a big problem with the production of motor resources. The military situation in Bakhmut is not catastrophic. There is a catastrophe with the city itself and the destruction caused by the Russians. Protests in Russia are unrealistic. More than 70% of Russians support this war. And before some of you are gonna say you can't trust that statistic because nothing coming out of Russia is real, we have Ukrainian agents on the territory of Russia, and obviously these sources are verified and they're not taken from Russian government. Mobilization in Russia has been going on continuously since March 2022. From January 5th, Russia is preparing to close the borders for Russians under the age of 55 from the territory of Russia and Belarus. Next year will bring joy and victory to Ukraine and transfer of power in Russia. We have this joke in Ukraine that Budanov is a psychic who knows what you're gonna say and what's gonna happen before you say it or before it happens. So let's hope that his psychic capabilities with these predictions are going to come true. Meanwhile, in Russia, we're gonna start with our favorite classic, Russian madness. The main RT propagandist Solovyov, in his typical fashion, called on Russians to not be scared of death. Is this the first time he was honest in admitting that Russians are going to go to the war in Ukraine to their demise? Maybe it's not same old after all.
Сильно переоценена. Зачем бояться того, что неизбежно?
Нет, они не боятся,
Тем более,
поэтому они там и находятся.
мы же в рай попадем. То есть поэтому смерть — это окончание одного земного пути и начало другого. Но бояться этого, а исходя из этого, чтобы это влияло на принимаемые тобой решения.
Не в этом смысле.
I spoke too soon. Here is another clip from Russian TV where they're discussing Nazism that is not only flourishing in Ukraine, but apparently now in Scandinavia too. Enjoy.
Это не только нацизм на Украине. Это дает скандинавским нацистам колоссальную подпитку и поддержку. А почему они считают, им можно, а нам нельзя? А чем мы хуже? Это, я уж не говорю про прибалтийских фашистов. Это пробуждает нацизм и в самой Германии, где тоже на это смотрят и думают, а почему им можно, а чем мы хуже? А чем нам, почему нам нельзя?
I have very little comments on this one. What do you guys think of this brilliant speech? And now that we've had a little bit of warm-up, let's move on to the real Russian madness on the state level. Russian presidential spokesman Dmitry Peskov has communicated to the journalists that Putin is not going to communicate with them in the pre-pandemic format. He explained that there is, and I quote, a process of coronavirus mutation quite strong epidemiological waves of different strains of influenza. I thought that Russians denied COVID to begin with and said that it could be cured with saunas and vodka. So Vladimir Vladimirovich, my advice to you is the same advice you gave to the Russian people in 2020. Drink some vodka and spend some time in the steam room. Apparently, Putin is so scared of communicating with the journalists and his own people that he recorded his presidential address with the background of Russian soldiers. And no, they're not FSB agents dressed as Russian soldiers at all. That one lady, that's a woman of so many professions it looks like, has appeared in all of his speeches, not because she's playing dress up, but because she's such a strong and good Russian citizen that she has tried many a different jobs before she landed on protecting her nation. Speaking of New Year's speeches and celebrations, look at this abundantly festive atmosphere at the Red Square in Moscow. That's okay. While the capital of Russia didn't seem to go all out with the festivities, Yekaterinburg certainly did. Somewhere in Ural, a family was watching a speech of their beloved Russian president. And their neighbors made sure that the fireworks at midnight will be ones that will never be forgotten. This might have been an even bigger bada boom than Ukraine experienced from Russian shelling. Ukraine doesn't even need to shell Russia. They succeed in doing it themselves. And this particular event seems pretty telling of how the 2023 is going to go for them. The NATO intelligence said that the Russian armed forces are in such a dire condition that it might take up to 5 years to restore them to the original. They stressed that the army's losses in tanks, artillery, BMPs, APCs, and manpower are very significant. And the missile potential is the same because it's the war of resources. The defense minister of Ukraine, Oleksiy Reznikov, only added some salt to the wound as saying, the fact that this used to be the second army of the world is no longer talked about. Oof. That really must hurt Putin. Meanwhile, in Ukraine, the 2023 predictions are far less dreary. Kyrylo Budanov is confident that this year is going to bring us joy and victory, and that Ukrainians are going to be able to enjoy some fantastic news either in the middle or in the second half of the year. Piggybacking off of that, Mikhailo Podolyak says that in 2023, every criminal will pay for their actions. Nothing characterizes the disgusting nature of modern Russia better than today's cynical attack on Ukraine on New Year's Eve. Houses, hotels were destroyed, there are dead, and all this under festive fireworks and rewarding of fat-bellied generals. But the holiday of evil will not be long. In 2023, every criminal will receive his sentence. Speaking of sentences, they ended for 140 Ukrainian defenders who came back from captivity right before New Year's Eve. Among them, there are two very notable ones. Do you remember Adik? If you don't, here he is, the famous Azovstal dog who was given to Kadyrov, and Kadyrov renamed him to Borza and said that it will be his personal guard dog for his home. Well, turns out he isn't, because he's back home and safe. Another notable defender is a Crimean Tatar paramedic from Azovstal. His name is Isan Asanadjiev, and it's very big that he was able to return, because the two groups of people that Russians really don't want to let free are Azov regiment defenders and Crimean Tatars, against whom they have committed multiple genocides in the past 100 years, including the one going on in Crimea today. But of course, we're dealing with Russia, so no good deed goes unpunished, and they continue to ramp up attacks against Kyiv and other Ukrainian cities. That does not prevent Ukrainians from coming back to Ukraine. There are now 3.6 million people back in Kyiv, and that is almost the same population as the city had right before the full-scale invasion. They were at 3.8 million. Not only are Ukrainians coming back home, but they're also continuing to be incredibly inventive under these dire circumstances. In Vinnytsia, one of the residents made a mini hydropower plant that supplies electricity to neighboring high-rises. This man made a makeshift electricity plant. And not only that, despite the year full of shelling, Ukraine managed to provide itself with food. We helped to conduct the most difficult sowing campaign in the history of Ukraine in a timely manner. Thanks to this, we have already harvested more than 60 million tons of crops, and Ukraine has definitely provided itself with food. Just imagine how difficult it must have been to do that while there are missiles flying over you every day. And yet we still accomplished it. The armed forces of Ukraine have some good news too. They're advancing in Kherson region. It is reported that allegedly our defenders have taken control of the Great Potemkin Island, and it is located between the left and the right bank of the Dnipro River. The General Staff officially has not commented on this yet, but we're awaiting some very good news. And it's really not that far-fetched, because according to the deputy head of the OP, Kyrylo Tymoshenko, the armed forces of Ukraine have liberated 1,884 settlements in the past year so far, and they will continue liberating many more. Also, 15,199 infrastructure facilities have been renewed. The protection of 297 energy facilities has been organized, where specialists are working 24/7, and protective structures are being built on the border with Belarus. And Secretary of the National Defense and Security Council, Alexei Danilov, said something even more impressive. If we need to be where we consider it necessary to protect our country, we will be there, and we will not ask anyone. And all this talk about not annoying someone there is nonsense. In layman's terms, the Ukrainian army may find itself on the territory of Russia if it deems so necessary to protect Ukraine, and we're not gonna ask anyone's permission to do so. He also noted that Ukraine will react if there are actions launched from the territory of Belarus. Belarus is occupied by the Russian Federation. The Russian military behave there like they are at home. When a decision is made, God forbid that the Belarusians start hostilities. Then we will react. And it looks like at this point, no world leaders are going to have anything negative to say about that, because in their minds, Russia seems to have already lost. German Economy Minister Robert Habeck believes that Russia is on its way to military defeat in Ukraine, and that's the statement with which he commenced 2022. According to him, it's because Ukraine receives weapons from the United States, Europe, and NATO, and uses these weapons skillfully, strategically, and heroically. And then NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg urged Germany and other European countries to continue providing Ukraine with military aid. It may sound paradoxical, but military support for Ukraine is the fastest way to peace. Every country has the right to defend itself. So does Ukraine. In his understanding, which is also the understanding of most Ukrainians that we have been trying to relay to the world for 9 months now, but I digress, Russia is only going to stop this war if Putin is convinced that he cannot achieve his military goals in Ukraine. And then a peaceful negotiation can take place on Ukraine's terms. Then Emmanuel Macron, in his typical flip-floppy fashion, said in his address to the nation on New Year's that his country is going to continue supporting Ukraine. What? You mean without the security guarantees for Russia? Count on France and count on Europe, Macron said. And then, surprisingly a more consistent politician, the Prime Minister of Italy, Giorgia Meloni, said that Italy is ready to become a guarantor of peace agreement on Ukraine, and she's preparing a visit to Kyiv in February 2023. She also then proceeded to give an interview to a Russian journalist and explain to them exactly why Italy is going to continue supporting Ukraine and why Russia's actions are a threat to international order. Take a look.
Che quelle scelte sul piano politico ci sono. E sono scelte di violazione del diritto internazionale, e sono scelte che, se la comunità internazionale dovesse, diciamo così, accettare, purtroppo farebbero crollare l'intero castello della nostra costruzione giuridica internazionale. Cioè, io temo che diciamo, il principio che la Russia rischia di voler far passare con l'invasione dell'Ucraina sia un principio poco conveniente per tutti, cioè il principio che chi è militarmente più forte può invadere il suo vicino. Lei capisce che questo per noi è inaccettabile.
And as if her words weren't powerful enough, Poland's permanent representative to the UN, Krzysztof Szczerski, believes that Western attempts to save Russia's face are only going to destroy the international order that has developed after World War III, and we can't let that happen. And that's exactly why the world should do what Ben Hodges wants us to do in order for Ukraine to take Crimea back by the end of August this year, because that will effectively put an end to Russian hostilities. Ukraine will liberate Crimea by the end of August if we continue to deliver what we promised and if we maintain sanctions. He also believes that this can happen even sooner if the West provides Ukraine with long-range weapons. So if you agree with him, I urge you to write to your representatives and ask them to do just that. And with that, unfortunately, that's all I have for you for today. But if you enjoyed this brief or found it informative, please don't forget to give it a like, leave a comment, subscribe to my channel, turn on all of your notifications so you don't miss when the next one comes out. And as always, check your sources and don't fall for propaganda. And I will see you on Wednesday.